hopefully you can hear me. Oops. Yep, it's working, so I can mute myself on my laptop. Cool. Right, I think there's 5 people watching, so that's quite a good amount to start. So, as we can see, there isn't necessarily a really thought out thing to this particular tour. I mean, obviously with Syndicate there is no history tour. That was something that was added to Origins, which was the game that came out after this one. As I mentioned in the lecture, this is still the most recent, in terms of historical setting, game to come out in the series. And so in many ways we always have a high expectation of what the depiction in Syndicate is meant to be. Now obviously London has actually changed quite a lot since the 1800s, or certainly the kind of mid to late 1800s, but we've got Trafalgar Square here and this is kind of as we expect it to be. But something which I think I've alluded to briefly in one of the previous sessions, but it's important to kind of exemplify here, is yeah, we've got the streets of London, there's a pretty good amount of people, we've got horse and carriage going around, but if you look at the streets themselves, they are remarkably clean. Yes, there is some kind of mud and dirt on them, we've got surprisingly nicely looking puddles of water as well, but really the streets are remarkably clean. Although we do have, might think it's bizarre for me to point out, but we do have some Horsemen here, so they have made some acknowledgement to the fact that this did exist in the streets, but allegedly from what I've heard about historical kind of write-ups of the period in time, there should be a lot more of it on display here, so much so that what actually happened is there were child sweepers who would go around and clear up the muck, and there was so much of it sometimes they would even drown in it, given how much there is. And of course the other thing is the sky is remarkably clear. It's a very sunny day on here. The stream is, yeah, it's doing a fairly good job of putting up. So someone saying about, oh cool, I got someone who is clearly a bot saying if I want to become famous. No, I'm good, thanks. So someone's saying about buying flags. Is there a flag? Oh, of course, yeah, that's the old viewpoint. That guy doesn't like me. So obviously we've still got very much the constraints that is Assassin's Creed. And of course I think the outfit that I got her wearing is not exactly the most practical things. And also I've got the royal banner as well. I'll give it that one for now. Some of the street textures look stretched. Interesting. I mean, this is getting on a bit now. Was it 5 years? Yeah, I think it came out in 2015. So yes, and it. I'm playing on a base PS4, but I think it did receive a PS4 Pro, so it upgrades. So if it was played on there, the textures might look a little bit better. But on the whole, this is how they look. There's no HDR functionality on this, although not that would come up from the stream. It performs fine, so that's not a problem. So yeah, what I'm going to do now actually is quite useful, and this wasn't planned, but we've got Trafalgar Square here, and if we keep going, so I actually mentioned a couple of weeks ago in regard to the kind of simulation aspects of depiction. So here you've got Charing Cross Station, which, I mean, yes, it is close to Trafalgar Square, but there's still a little bit more of a gap between the two. But the main point is, So I say yes, we got Trafalgar Square, Charing Cross Station here, but then the church that are coming up here. In reality, the distance between the two is a lot more. Like, yes, they are on the same street, but they're practically next to each other here. And it was for me when playing, because where I went for my master's was King's College, which is right opposite the church, so that would be about here, this street here, but I think this building exists, but the main building of it is a somewhat more modern one, so that would be here, and that's clearly not existing, so admittedly that would construct after, so you've got some differences there, but the fact of how close this particular church is to Charing Cross Station, the fact that you can almost just about see it from here, straight away shows the constraints that the developers have put in, but that is for understandable reasons. Again, they're not trying to create an accurate depiction of London, they're trying to create an authentic one. For most people, they wouldn't have noticed this difference, and to them it's like, yeah, that looks like London, that it's close enough, that's fine, and they've got this believability in it. Obviously this is not realistic in the slightest, but as I pointed out, Assassin's Creed is not meant to be a wholly realistic experience, but I'm mostly going up here to help provide a better view in this. So thinking about what years the game set, it was set in 1868. So as I say, we can see Trafalgar Square from here, and it's certainly much closer than it would be. But also, we still haven't got some small action going on over there, but or certainly down here, and it is to a certain extent affecting the visibility over there, but not so much on the whole. We've still got remarkably clear. I mean, this put almost the visibility is almost the same as you get in London today, and that was certainly not the case here. But again, we've got the gameplay elements, and video games often strive to have good kind of sky visibility, and being able to show off how much of the game is actually able to show off at once is also a good thing. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's as you rightly put out about can you imagine walking from one side of London to the other? That is, I would argue, probably one of the main reasons why there are these shortening on the street, because players would just get bored. So can I go all the way to the smokestack? So I can certainly go to the one which, the direction I'm facing now, you will be able to see. So I will jump down. Yeah, out of all the Assassin's Creed games, I think this is probably the easiest to traverse around. I mean, it helps, you do have all these buildings to grab on. I mean, actually, I just thought that possibly one reason why the map in Odyssey and Origins just seems so much more vast compared to this one, because you've got these wide open spaces, they don't obviously take as much time to construct as this one does, because you've got all the buildings to put together. Now, of course, there are buildings in Origins and Odyssey, but certainly not to this scale. I mean, London is a very intricate city, and as I also mentioned, I think in the previous lecture, that you don't have that same grid system. It's almost an architectural mess, or certainly from a city planning perspective, it's kind of all put together. He does. Right, this also might speed things up. So I say these are certainly some of the smokestacks that we can see. Yeah, and also the horse is fairly indestructible. I mean, that should, no way should a horse just going into that cause that amount of damage, but again, there's got to be some concessions, otherwise you would not use a horse at all in this game. So we're now where a lot of this smog is coming from, and it is coming up fairly clearly, but on the whole, visibility is still remarkably high.
There you go. Calmly.
Right, so we're now at Waterloo, which is certainly where kind of expected to be. But the other thing I want to point out is that, like, the positioning of Whitechapel doesn't really make sense. So yes, City of London where it's meant to be, but Whitechapel, if we can see me moving it around here, should be over here. Okay, we've got Southwark here, and this should be London Bridge Station, isn't it? Yeah, so this is London Bridge Station. So as I say, and we've got Tower Bridge hasn't actually been built yet, so that's why we've got this portal to World War One, and in that point you do actually get that. And I think I will actually travel to that in a moment to show that off. And in that mode, it kind of locks off this particular area. But if I go to Whitechapel for the moment, and try and remember how poorly the load times are in this game. Yeah, I can go back to London Bridge Station. I'll just focus on Whitechapel for the moment, and I'll certainly go back. Yeah, I mean, London Bridge Station has changed unimaginably. I mean, even when I was living up there, just in the few years I was there, it changed completely. It's nothing like the station it was when I first moved there. Here we go. Yes, I wanted to travel to Spitalfield to show that off. Oops. And of course, this whole diving down thing, anyone who did this would be very much dead. So no, they're just digging a hole. So I thought for a moment then they might be the kind of road sweepers, but they're not. Although we can see the different types of streets here, so this is looking a bit more like we would imagine how poor the streets would be at the time. And actually, I'm glad you mentioned the train, because I would just show up on this. We can see the train line, but they've made it very much a circular route around London. So if you go on one, it will keep going around. So try and follow it all around. Yeah, so it does actually, this one does have an end point, but as we know, Victoria, not all lines end at Victoria, so this just seems to have one avenue away from it. So and that's your kind of whistle stop tour around London. But then this area, actually this train line here as well. Yep, I will. Ow, leave me alone, horse. I will venture to World War One in a moment. Although when I say World War One, it is very much set in London, and not you'll be able to see it, but when you do the campaign that's associated with it, it does bring in Winston Churchill, which at first glance for some people might think, oh, what's he doing there? But he was actually involved in the World War One preparations at that time. So here's Spitalfield Market, which is kind of like how it was, but certainly has changed since. And this area kind of a note because it was also around this area that Jack the Ripper allegedly kind of stalked around. And if we go into the Codex, where is it? Yeah, so whilst it doesn't have the Discovery Tour mode, it does have some historical facts which are open to the player to find out if they want to. And it does have a surprisingly elaborate history and detail about it. And it also mentions the Ten Bells pub, which is a pub that does still exist as well. Like for some reason, like struggling to find it in the game itself. Yeah, I can go inside. There's a window. I'll just stand on the vegetables and blend in. And shove that guy out of the way. So yeah, real Spitalfield Market is now a bit bigger than this. I don't know to what scale this particular building is, but it's still helpful that you actually are able to go inside this one. So now let's go to quote-unquote World War One. In reality, really, it just means we can view Tower Bridge because by that point it has been built. And another interesting historical fact to go alongside with it, and seems very apt for today where you need to have your substantial meal to go with your drink. So, almost there's like glass flying, but what is it? Whether it's some kind of, yeah, why bits of glass are flying down. So she's almost now dressed in some kind of like military style outfit. But as you can see, we've got Tower London as we expected to be, but what amount of map have we now got access to? So in this one we only really have this particular area to explore around. It's just a lot more limited, but understandably they didn't want to have to create the whole entire map to go with it. Because also the building styles are a little bit different since then, just as kind of natural evolution of the city. But we've got St. Catherine's Dock here, which again you unfortunately can't actually go to, but that's still very much here today. But the main thing is we can also explore the Tower of London, which we can do. We said about there weren't any bombers, but if you remember from the article that Julian posted, it talked about what was happening over the skies in London World War One. It did say there certainly were there were attacks that took place overhead at night. They certainly weren't anywhere near to the scale as seen with the Blitz in World War Two, but Zeppelins and fighter planes did come over across London during the time, but certainly not in any kind of really dramatic way. Really, the lights are kind of almost there to act as a deterrent and also kind of help enable some kind of almost sense of security amongst residents as well. Cool, so you can go inside. We'll go to the very top. So we do have quite a good view of what's going on here, but obviously it's that bit there which is kind of the science fiction element of the game. Because also you're not actually playing Evie, I think you're playing her great-granddaughter or granddaughter. But is it quite interesting? I mean, almost at first glance, the depiction of London time doesn't look too dissimilar to how it was depicted in the 1868. I mean, the bridges seem relatively the same. Yeah, I mean, you've got London Bridge there, and you can still see St Paul's in the distance. Okay, that's convenient. Not quite too sure why the tanks are there, but again, maybe to even the perception of security. I can't remember why. Oh, it's underneath that sort of no-go zone. I don't believe. I highly. Yeah, I can get on the tank, but I can't go in it. And that's the limit to where you can go through. As I said, there was only so much of the map they wanted to actually create, which is fair enough. Because really there's only one section of the game. It is cool that you can go back to, otherwise it'd be a bit of a waste, but you do have the full circumference of the Tower of London. And you can assassinate this poor soldier just for the hell of it. No, it does not aid the war effort. Maybe I'm now kind of role-playing as a spy. Or I should say an enemy spy. I mean, obviously you've got alternative history in the sense of you could say, oh, the assassins are aiding the war effort because apparently Britain's fighting on the side of good in all of this. Actually, now I think about it, it could be quite interesting to have a World War II themed Assassin's Creed game. Because that's the other thing with Assassin's Creed games, they do try and create the kind of narrative of good versus evil, where in some cases that isn't always the case. Well, I think I've basically managed to successfully hide. Well, basically, Assassin's Creed setting now would be Watch Dogs Legion, or Legion 3. Yeah, Watch Dogs Legion, which is Watch Dogs 3. Yeah, I'm interested to play that one because, like, obviously I don't want to say criticism because I support what they're doing, but the observations of Syndicate and how they narrowed the streets, I think in some way from what I've seen, the same basically applies to what they've done with Watch Dogs 3 Legion, but it will certainly be interesting to see how far they've taken that. Obviously, the historical argument doesn't apply there, but if you recall some of the statements I've making in regard to the simulation of real places in the video game context would very much apply with that one. So there's not too much else to do with that one. Oh, well, that is actually quite mad that your grandmother was born before then. No, my cargo. Oh, of course, I will just show. So, in the game, it well, quite good. You could easily switch between the two different siblings in this game, and quite a lot of the missions you could also switch between them. Now, in some stories, there's a little bit element, but on the whole, the game basically treats the characters roughly the same. Which, on the one hand, it's kind of good, but it kind of sticks with this almost revisionist history that the Assassin's Creed games do tend to peddle, almost that like. For example, female characters or just females in general are treated better than they actually were. Because I mean, on the street, so what we were talking about with Kingdom Come, the characters are treated differently based on what they were wearing. In this game, if you wear kind of quote unquote fancier outfit, none of the people in the city will really react to you any differently, and likewise if you're Jacob or Evie, the citizens don't react to you any differently either. So we're now in Monument. So yeah, this is the rail bridge. Okay, and then yeah, we've got London Bridge, as in the road bridge over here. So, been streaming for about half an hour. Yeah, actually exactly half an hour. So as I say, this gives some idea with this, and as you recall, I started the original lecture with the idea, the notion of verisimilitude, which is the kind of appearance of being real, and where that kind of lies. Get the exact quote back up in my notes. Yeah, the appearance of being true or real, and certainly this has the appearance of being that. It certainly looks very much like how we imagine London to look, but as we have also seen that when you go beneath the surface, things have been changed. Most of these are for the benefit of the gameplay, be that to prevent the player from having to traverse quite long distances to get around, but also for the developers, so they're not like it would. I don't know how long it took them to basically recreate the city or to create the particular depiction of London, but certainly a long amount of time. But the effort paid off. Most players are not going to notice the inaccuracies in that because, as I say, there's been this focus on authenticity to kind of paste over those gaps and to make them not noticeable for the main player, so they're not dragged out of the experience. The reflections, I thought the reflections are pretty good. I mean, obviously there's no race racing in this. Yeah, I mean, obviously you can't see your character, but there's some shadowing going on there. I think for the time, pretty good. But anyway, so I will end things there. So thanks for tagging along and having this, and hopefully this helps to exemplify some of the points I was making in the earlier lecture. So goodbye for now.